Today is January 2nd, 2023. Let's take a look at the situation in and around Ukraine. Let's start by taking a look at liveuamap.com. This is a very pro-Ukrainian map, so always keep that in mind when we are looking at the information. It is still informative nonetheless. We can see that even at this point in time, Ukrainian air defenses are still operating across the country. Ukraine has been under constant missile and drone attack by Russia over the last couple of days. I'm going to talk about that more in just a moment. We look along the front line all the way from Kherson in the south, across Zaporozhye, and into the Donbass region. The lines are more or less relatively stable. There is heavy fighting continuing in and around Bakhmut, to the north and south of Bakhmut. Donetsk city, where there are no military targets, Ukraine has constantly bombarded it, and people will tell you since 2014, and they have been constantly shelling downtown Donetsk. There are no military targets. They are solely terrorizing and killing civilians. Please note, and again, this is a pro-Ukrainian map, these red rifle icons outside of these red Russian-held areas means that Russia is pressing on the offensive. Not necessarily gaining ground, but they are on the offensive. They are pressing Ukrainian defenses. This is a pro-Ukrainian map admitting that. Kremenna is still Russian-held, even according to this pro-Ukrainian map. So that is the situation on the ground. Let's talk a little bit more about these missile and drone strikes that have been taking place before, during, and now after New Year. Let's look at this article by the BBC. Ukraine claims hundreds of Russians killed by missile attacks. So this is talking about a Ukrainian missile strike on a Russian military target. They're claiming they've killed hundreds of Russians. This article also talks about the missile and drone strike. So let's talk about the Ukrainian strike first. Ukraine says it has killed around 400 Russian soldiers in a missile attack on the occupied Donetsk region. The missile targeted a building in the city of Mavkivka, where Russian forces were thought to be stationed. The figure has not been verified. Pro-Russian authorities acknowledged casualties, but did not confirm the figures being reported. As a matter of fact, Russian sources are saying the numbers are much lower. The BBC claims that Russian officials are saying that it is a HIMARS guided rocket, GPS guided rocket. It says a number of Russian commentators and bloggers acknowledged the attack, but suggest the numbers were lower than claimed. Now, these commentators and bloggers are very critical of the Russian government. When there are strikes, they will try to get to the bottom of how bad it is, and they will go and attempt to call out people in the Russian government to hold them accountable. And there are sources like this on the pro-Ukrainian side as well. And these are the sources to go to try to cut through the claims being made by both sides. I find that these sources on both sides of the conflict are the most reliable. Not entirely reliable, but most reliable. So Ukraine probably carried out a successful strike on a position where Russian forces were assembled. Why am I talking about this? Why am I bringing this up? I want to bring this up because this is what's possible when you have precision-guided weapons. Even on the small scale that Ukraine has available to them through a small number of HIMARS launchers and a dwindling number of guided rockets. Now, imagine this type of attack being carried out on Ukraine every single day on a much larger scale. This is what Russia has been doing since late February. They have their own guided rocket system. It's called Tornado S. It fires satellite guided rockets as well. They're quite capable of carrying out attacks like this on a daily basis. They also have the much longer range ballistic missile system Iskander. And they also use the Iskander missile to hit areas where Ukrainian troops are assembled. So they're reporting this. This is in the news because Ukraine very rarely carries out successful strikes like this. This is something Russia carries out on a nearly daily basis. I just want to point out that this needs to be put into context. Now, this same BBC article talks about the wave of missile and drone strikes that have been hitting Ukraine day and night for several days now. And it says all 39 Iranian-made drones were eventually shot down by Ukraine, the Ukrainian military said. But Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, says energy facilities were damaged, disrupting power and heating supplies. Russia has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure for several months, destroying power stations and plunging millions into darkness during the country's freezing winter. So if you're shooting down all of the drones, energy facilities would not have been disrupted during this wave of attacks, because you shot them down before they reached the facilities. So obviously some did reach the facilities, and millions would not be in darkness and cold if Ukrainian air defenses were performing as successfully as the Ukrainian military claims. So clearly the Ukrainian military is not a reliable source talking about what they are and are not intercepting. These swarms of drones that Russia sends in, they know from the beginning that a certain percentage will be shot down. That is why they send large numbers of them all at once. They know a number will be shot down. They also know that a certain number will get through and hit their targets. And quite clearly they have. Here is another BBC article. And this is, again, another important development. Ukraine must get long-term support, warns NATO chief. And it says Western countries must be prepared to provide long-term support to Ukraine as Russia shows no signs of relenting. NATO Secretary General has said Jens Stoltenberg told the BBC that military support would ensure the survival of Ukraine as a sovereign country and force Russia to sit down and negotiate an end to the war. Russia's leader accuses the West of using Ukraine to destroy his country. So two things here. First of all, they're admitting that Russia is not relenting. If they honestly thought Russia was about to run out of artillery or missiles or tanks or any of the other weapon systems they continuously say Russia is low on, they would not be talking like this. They would not be talking about the need to have a long-term mindset to fight this conflict. They're also talking about forcing Russia to go to the negotiation table. Now, if Ukraine had truly turned the tide with its two offensives in Kharkov and Kherson, and they were now an unstoppable force punching through disarrayed, disorganized, and retreating Russian forces, they would settle this on the battlefield. They would not be talking about forcing Russia to negotiate. So just the way they're framing this now at this point tells you how everything we've heard about Ukraine's success and resilience, this has all been a lie. I want to point out something else, too. The BBC, Russia says Russia's leader accuses the West of using Ukraine to destroy his country. So Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying this, and this is actually something that is absolutely true. I think a real journalist would point out that this is an objective truth. And we know it's an objective truth because U.S. policymakers at the RAND Corporation, a U.S. government and arms industry funded policy think tank, have actually published policy papers about this. And this is their paper titled Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground. It is dated 2019. And they talk about this report examines a range of possible means to extend Russia. It talks about the most promising measures to stress Russia. It also talks about geopolitical measures to bait Russia into overextending itself. And one of the options listed, as a matter of fact, measure number one is provide lethal aid to Ukraine. The RAND Corporation paper says the United States could increase its military assistance to Ukraine in terms of both the quantity and quality of weapons. The United States could also become more vocal in its support for NATO membership for Ukraine because they knew this would provoke Russia. This was creating a national security threat to Russia that Russia would be incapable of ignoring just for the sake of self-preservation. We're talking about the NATO military alliance, which has invaded and destroyed one country after the other all throughout the 21st century. And now it is on Russia's doorstep, preparing to transform Ukraine into a fortress right on its border. It says expanding U.S. assistance to Ukraine, including lethal military assistance, would likely increase the costs to Russia in both blood and treasure of holding the Donbass region. More Russian aid to the separatists and an additional Russian troop presence would likely be required, leading to larger expenditures, equipment losses, and Russian casualties. The latter could become quite controversial at home, as it did when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. U.S. policymakers are talking about killing Russians and hurting the Russian Federation as a nation. This is what Western policy papers said they were going to do. This is what the BBC is now telling us Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying the West is doing. The Rand Corporation paper also says Russia might counter-escalate, committing more troops and pushing them deeper into Ukraine. Russia might even preempt U.S. action, escalating before any additional U.S. aid arrives. Such escalation might extend Russia. Eastern Ukraine is already a drain. Taking more of Ukraine might only increase the burden, albeit at the expense of the Ukrainian people. And we've heard one politician in Washington after the other say, Ukrainian blood, our bullets. We've heard them actually literally say things like this.
It's money well spent. In my humble opinion, this is very much like what Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s, and I do have some experience with that. I know that makes me a lot older than most of our viewers, but in fact, he believed in supporting freedom fighters. He did it in Latin America. He did it in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique. He did it in Afghanistan. Those people were willing, as the Ukrainian people are, to use their blood and our bullets.
It is a proxy war. They have done this deliberately, and this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin is pointing out, and that the BBC is only partially reporting on. They're omitting all of this other context, very crucial context from their reporting, as they have done since 2014. Now, we hear the head of NATO talking about long-term support for Ukraine. So what does that look like? Is there anything new that represents a change to the actual lack of support Ukraine has been getting, the insufficient support Ukraine has been getting? So here's an article from Bloomberg. Ukrainian troops begin EU training as bloc expands military role. So in regards to expanding its military role, it says the EU is trying to mount the ambitious 106.7 million euro mission aimed at training 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers, on top of significant weapons deliveries to Ukraine, economy-crushing sanctions on Russia, and billions of euros to bolster Kiev's finances. It was very clever how Bloomberg didn't mention which economy is actually being crushed by EU sanctions. It's actually, spoiler, it's Europe's economy that is being crushed right now. The training program is supposedly unfolding over the course of 2 months, and they say they're going to train 15,000 troops. They don't quite make it clear in this article, but if you read several articles and piece together all the details, it turns out this 15,000 troops will be trained over the course of 2 or more years. They're training, and it even says in this article, they are the first contingent is 1,100 troops. So they'll be trained for 2 months, and then they'll bring another about 1,000 troops in, and they will continue doing this over the course of over 2 years to reach 15,000. And just keep in mind that Ukraine is losing at a minimum 200 to 300 dead every single day. The fighting in Bakhmut now is particularly intense. Ukraine is allegedly losing up to a battalion, 1,000 men in dead and injured every single day. So 1,000 every 2 months is insignificant. And they don't mention whether these are fresh conscripts or Ukrainian troops being brought off the front line and trained up and then sent back in. If it's the first option, fresh recruits, 2 months is not nearly enough to prepare you for anything, let alone real combat. So like the British training program, this is all for optics. This is not going to help anyone at all. It's going to give these recruits or conscripts a false sense of confidence, and they will go into battle and they will die. If they are troops with experience, already 2 months is actually pretty good, but the scale of this training program is so tiny, it is more or less irrelevant. So while yes, NATO most certainly, if they want to win this proxy conflict, and inflict significant damage on Russia, if they want to extend or even collapse Russia, they need to continue supporting Ukraine. But it is very clear that even at the beginning of last year, 2022, with NATO's stockpiles fresh, they were unable to send Ukraine the amount of help that it needed. This year, 2023, will be even worse. Nothing that they're talking about doing this year is going to fix this problem between now and 2024. This US-European proxy war against Russia reminds me very much of young men and women across the West who want to live extravagant lifestyles, but they don't want to put even the most basic amount of work or make the most basic sacrifices to live even a moderately comfortable life. They're always living beyond their means, and US foreign policy in regards to Ukraine and vis-a-vis Russia is reaching far beyond its ability to actually achieve these goals, and not just vis-a-vis Russia, but also its policy of containment, encirclement and containment of China. So this is going to be a desperate, dangerous disaster unfolding all throughout 2023. We'll keep an eye on all of this as it unfolds. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description for other places you can find and follow my work. All of my YouTube videos are automatically uploaded in a day or two to Rumble and Odyssey. I'm on Telegram. I'm on Twitter as well. In the video description below, there will be all of the links that I referenced, as well as ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If an ad ever pops up, feel free to skip it or turn on your ad blocker. It's not doing me any good. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out all last year and now into 2023, thank you so much. This work would not be possible without that support. So again, thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching.